You got a raise last year, maybe 5%, maybe 7%, and for a moment it felt like real progress forward. You felt proud, relieved, hopeful that things were finally changing, that your hard work was beginning to show meaningful financial results. For about 2 weeks, everything seemed lighter, like pressure had eased and the future was opening in quiet, promising ways. Then slowly, almost invisibly, that feeling faded, and life began to look exactly the same as it always had before. Your bank account balance stayed flat, your savings refused to grow, and nothing about your daily routine actually improved much. You were not eating better dinners, not sleeping easier, and definitely not booking the trip you thought you could afford. The extra money quietly disappeared into everyday life, without warning, without explanation, and without any clear visible trace remaining behind. Here is the quiet truth nobody clearly explains. The raise you celebrated emotionally was never truly real in practice anyway. You did not suddenly become poorer, but you also did not move forward financially in any meaningful, lasting direction either. You simply stayed where you were, standing still while everything around you continued moving faster every single passing year forward. Welcome to something rarely described emotionally, the invisible force quietly shaping your financial life known as the inflation tax today. It is the tax nobody votes for, nobody debates loudly, and nobody ever sees written clearly on official financial documents anywhere. There is no bill arriving in your mailbox, no receipt to track, and no simple number showing what quietly disappeared from you. Yet year after year, it removes more value from your life than almost any visible financial obligation you regularly continue paying. The most dangerous part is invisibility, because losses you cannot clearly see are always the hardest ones to fight back against. To understand what truly happened to your raise, we must begin carefully with a simple and ordinary-looking number first. 3.4% was the official inflation rate recorded in the United States during the year 2023. That percentage means every day things you buy gradually cost more by the end of that same single year overall. Groceries, gasoline, rent, insurance, childcare, every necessary expense slowly rising, while your attention stays focused somewhere completely different instead. Now imagine earning $60,000 in that same year, believing financial stability was slowly forming beneath your feet already. Then the following year arrives and your employer gives you a raise that appears strong and encouraging on paper today. 4% more income sounds meaningful, enough to create hope that your financial direction is finally beginning to improve now. Your salary becomes $62,400, a number that feels larger, safer, and emotionally reassuring at glance. But inflation during that same period remained close to 3.4%. Quietly offsetting nearly all progress noticed before. In real purchasing power, your improvement was only about 0.6% across the entire year of work total. That equals roughly $360 extra in true value spread thinly across 12 long, demanding months of living. About $30 per month, barely enough for a simple dinner and certainly not enough to change your lifestyle meaningfully. So the raise you celebrated emotionally delivered almost nothing tangible. Once rising prices silently removed most of its strength completely. Everything else was absorbed quietly into the background system of inflation, transferring value away without asking permission or drawing attention. And the harshest reality is that you never actually see this process happening while it steadily reshapes your financial future. There is no notification, no clear signal, and no visible moment where the loss becomes obvious enough to react immediately. Your salary increase feels real because the number changed, but the hidden value behind that number quietly weakened instead there. This silent erosion continues in the background of everyday life, unnoticed yet powerful enough to shape decades of personal outcomes. To understand why, we must look deeper than averages and explore how inflation truly behaves inside real human lives daily. Because official averages describe a theoretical consumer, not your personal situation, responsibilities, or the specific costs you actually face today. If you rent your home, housing costs may rise far faster than national statistics calmly suggest within reports each year. In many cities, rents have jumped dramatically within a single year, stretching budgets beyond what salaries can reasonably support anymore. If you have children, childcare expenses have been growing faster than general inflation for years across many regions worldwide today. Transportation costs, especially fuel, can surge unpredictably, rising sharply before settling only slightly lower than previous painful peaks again later. Your personal inflation rate, the one shaping daily Survival is often much higher than the official number reported publicly today, which means that 4% raise might not have covered your real increase in living costs at all that year. In practical terms, you may have quietly moved backward financially, despite working just as hard as before every single day. And nobody sends a letter explaining this loss because the system simply does not communicate in clear personal ways ever. To truly understand inflation, we must shift perspective from prices rising to the hidden weakening of money itself over time. Inflation happens when more money exists inside the system without an equal increase in real goods and services available. Central banks control this supply, adjusting it intentionally to influence economic growth, stability, borrowing, and overall financial confidence levels. In the United States, that responsibility belongs to the Federal Reserve, an institution powerful yet distant from ordinary daily life. When the economy weakens, new money is created digitally to encourage borrowing, spending, investment, and continued economic movement forward again. This support can prevent collapse in the short term, but it also quietly dilutes the value of money already earned. So while nothing visible appears to change immediately, the purchasing power inside each dollar slowly becomes smaller over time. That quiet reduction spreads through prices, wages, savings, and investments, reshaping financial reality long before most people recognize the shift. During the pandemic, trillions of new dollars entered the system to prevent collapse, stabilize markets, and support failing economic activity everywhere. Those dollars never truly disappeared afterward, instead remaining in circulation and gradually pushing prices higher across everyday essential goods and services. Your paycheck number may have looked similar, but what that paycheck could actually buy continued declining quietly beneath the surface. This invisible transfer of value is what many economists describe as the true hidden long-term cost of sustained inflation, and the impact is never shared equally between everyone living within the same broader economic system structure around them. People who already own assets like stocks, businesses, or real estate often benefit when new money flows into markets first. Asset prices tend to rise as liquidity increases, making existing ownership more valuable without additional labor or productivity required personally. Home values climb, investment portfolios expand, and balance sheets appear stronger even when real underlying fundamentals remain mostly unchanged. But individuals relying only on wages experience the opposite effect as living costs continue rising faster than income growth. Rent, utilities, transportation, and food begin consuming larger portions of earnings, leaving little remaining room for saving or planning ahead. Instead of steadily building wealth, many households struggle simply to maintain stability while everyday expenses quietly accelerate beyond sustainable financial limits. This ongoing dynamic creates a gradual transfer of wealth away from labor and toward long-term asset ownership across extended time. Because the mechanism operates silently in the background, public attention rarely focuses on the deeper structural nature of this shift. Between 2020 and 2023, the Federal Reserve balance sheet expanded dramatically by several trillions overall. During that same period, major stock market indexes rose sharply as excess liquidity flowed freely through global financial systems. Housing prices across the United States increased rapidly while borrowing remained historically cheap and demand continued rising strongly nationwide. For existing homeowners, this created large paper gains without additional work, savings, or productivity improvements required from them personally. For first-time buyers, however, the same price increases pushed home ownership further outside realistic financial reach than before. Savings prepared for down payments quietly lost purchasing power, while property values accelerated upward in the opposite direction simultaneously. Inflation therefore affected both present affordability and future opportunity at the same time for millions of ordinary families everywhere. To understand why policymakers tolerate this reality, we must examine the enormous and growing scale of modern government debt. The United States federal debt now exceeds tens of trillions of dollars, a number difficult for most people to comprehend emotionally. Because that debt exists in dollars, inflation gradually reduces its real burden over long stretches of passing time. If prices rise while nominal debt stays fixed, repayment becomes easier when measured in real purchasing power terms. This creates a quiet systemic incentive for moderate inflation within heavily indebted economic systems across the modern global world. Governments benefit from slowly eroding obligations even while ordinary citizens experience declining real income strength over years. The resulting cost spreads broadly through reduced purchasing power instead of appearing as direct visible taxation on individuals. Unlike income, Taxes. Inflation cannot easily be voted away or avoided simply by moving somewhere else geographically. It operates continuously inside the currency system itself, influencing everyone who earns, saves, spends, or plans ahead financially. Protection usually requires owning assets that tend to rise alongside inflation, such as equities, property, or productive long-term businesses. Yet real access to these opportunities depends heavily on capital, knowledge, timing, and emotional tolerance for financial uncertainty and risk. Households living paycheck to paycheck often lack the spare resources necessary to participate meaningfully in long-term investment growth opportunities. As a result, inequality can widen slowly over time without dramatic events drawing urgent or sustained political attention anywhere. Even disciplined savers face challenges when interest earned on savings remains consistently below the prevailing long-term inflation rate. Money stored safely inside low-yield accounts quietly loses real purchasing power despite responsible, careful, and disciplined financial personal behavior. Across multiple decades, this steady erosion compounds, reshaping retirement expectations and long-term financial security for ordinary working families. Globally, most major central banks intentionally target modest positive inflation as a signal of stability and predictable economic growth. 2% yearly inflation appears small in isolation, yet it effectively doubles overall price levels within a single working lifetime. Unless wages rise proportionally during that same period, real purchasing power declines steadily, despite continuous effort and experience gained. Historical data across several decades shows real wage growth remaining relatively flat for many average workers in developed economies. Meanwhile, productivity, corporate earnings, and total national economic output have expanded substantially during that very same long period. The distribution of those gains has consistently favored capital ownership far more than traditional wage-based labor participation. Inflation interacts directly with this imbalance, reinforcing structural financial advantages already present within the broader economic system. Central banks attempt controlling inflation primarily through interest rate adjustments designed to slow borrowing, spending, and speculative investment activity. Higher borrowing costs reduce consumer demand, cool business expansion, and can eventually stabilize rising prices across markets. However, aggressive or prolonged rate increases also risk recession, unemployment, and broader financial instability throughout sensitive economic sectors. Because governments depend heavily on affordable debt financing, pressure often exists to avoid maintaining high interest rates too long. This constant tension keeps policy balanced uneasily between controlling inflation and sustaining ongoing economic growth momentum. Meanwhile, individuals continue navigating rising costs, uncertain wages, and fragile long-term financial planning in everyday modern life. Now let us make this deeply personal. And imagine you are trying to save consistently for retirement across decades ahead. You decide to set aside $500 every single month with discipline, patience, and long-term hope guiding you forward. Over 30 years, that steady habit quietly grows into $180,000 in total saved contributions alone. On the surface, this number feels meaningful, responsible, and emotionally reassuring after years of careful sacrifice and restraint. But inflation averaging near 3% slowly erodes what that money will actually be able to buy later. In real purchasing power, your savings may feel closer to $70,000 measured in today's value. Instead, you spent 3 full decades saving faithfully, yet more than half the real value quietly disappeared without any visible moment. Nothing dramatic was stolen, nothing obvious collapsed, and still the financial loss remained painfully real beneath the surface. This is why simply saving money without investing often fails to protect long-term stability or future independence for families. The system quietly forces participation in risk-based assets just to preserve purchasing power across passing years ahead. If you choose safety alone, inflation slowly guarantees loss instead of protection, despite careful and responsible financial behavior. To avoid falling behind, individuals must learn investing, diversification, patience, and long-horizon thinking about money and risk gradually. Yet access to clear financial education remains uneven, leaving many people uncertain, confused, and hesitant about where to begin. Fear of loss, complexity, and limited income often delay meaningful participation in markets for years or even decades. Meanwhile, time continues moving forward, allowing inflation to compound quietly year after year without pause or mercy. By the time awareness finally arrives, catching up can feel emotionally exhausting and mathematically overwhelming for ordinary people. This creates frustration, confusion, and the growing sense that real progress now requires impossible effort to achieve stability. Many people begin blaming themselves rather than recognizing the larger structural economic forces shaping outcomes silently around them. But the deeper truth is that discipline alone cannot fully overcome systemic financial design without broader structural change. The environment surrounding money quietly shapes results long before personal decisions even begin influencing final life outcomes. Wage earners exchange time for money while asset owners benefit from money, quietly creating more money over long periods. Inflation strengthens this divide by lifting asset prices much faster than wages can realistically rise for workers alone. Across decades, even small percentage differences can produce dramatically unequal financial futures between different groups everywhere. This process unfolds slowly, quietly, and almost invisibly, which is why it rarely faces strong collective resistance. No single moment feels shocking enough to trigger widespread reaction, even as long-term consequences continue building underneath daily life. Instead, the pressure accumulates gradually across years, shaping personal decisions, opportunities, and expectations about what feels possible. People delay starting families, postpone buying homes, and begin accepting financial instability as a normal, permanent reality. What once felt temporary slowly begins to feel permanent, unavoidable, and deeply woven into everyday economic existence. Expectations quietly shrink downward to match what appears financially achievable within current limits of income and opportunity. Hope itself adjusts gradually without any clear moment when the emotional shift becomes fully visible to the person. And still, the broader financial system continues operating exactly as it was originally designed to function. Central banks manage liquidity, governments manage debt, and markets respond logically according to structural incentives. Each institution follows internal logic focused on stability and growth, rather than individual emotional human outcomes directly. From inside the system, these policies appear necessary, rational, and protective against deeper economic collapse or instability. From outside, however, they may feel distant, confusing, unfair, and disconnected from everyday lived financial experience. Both perspectives can exist simultaneously, creating tension without any simple resolution within current global realities. That tension quietly defines much of modern financial life for individuals navigating uncertainty across changing conditions. Economic growth remains prioritized because visible stagnation produces immediate, painful consequences leaders struggle to manage. Inflation, by contrast, spreads discomfort slowly across time, making it easier to tolerate politically and socially. Gradual pain is often considered more acceptable than sudden crisis, even when long-term damage becomes greater. So moderate inflation remains an accepted and normalized feature of the modern global financial system today, even when it quietly reduces long-term purchasing power for millions of ordinary working people. Understanding this reality can feel uncomfortable, but it is necessary for making clearer and more informed financial decisions, because clarity is always the first meaningful step toward building stronger protection and long-term resilience. Once you clearly see the mechanism, your financial thinking and everyday decisions can slowly begin changing direction. You may start prioritizing ownership, investment, diversification, and long-term stability rather than short-term comfort, not perfectly and not instantly, but gradually through awareness, patience, and consistent small adjustments over time. Even modest, consistent changes can reshape future outcomes when enough time remains available ahead. Time itself becomes powerful again once aligned with understanding instead of confusion or passive financial drift. And recognizing the hidden inflation tax is where that deeper long-term understanding truly begins. From this point forward, the question is no longer what inflation is, but how you choose to respond going ahead. Some people ignore this reality completely, while others slowly begin adjusting habits, expectations, and long-term financial direction. The difference between those paths often becomes visible only after many quiet years have already passed unnoticed. Small, early decisions quietly compound into dramatically different futures shaped by awareness, discipline, patience, and opportunity. This is why education, understanding, and perspective matter just as deeply as income, luck, or timing alone. Without clarity, even higher earnings can still disappear silently inside the same structural financial pressure. But with awareness, even limited resources can sometimes be guided towards stronger and more stable long-term outcomes. The system itself may not change quickly, Yet personal understanding can still transform individual direction. That quiet shift in direction is often where genuine financial progress truly begins forming. Not through sudden miracles, but through steady, informed decisions repeated patiently across many passing years. The real challenge is not simply earning more money, but learning how money actually behaves across time. Without that understanding, effort alone can feel endless while meaningful progress remains painfully slow. Many people work harder every single year, yet still feel financially stuck in the same place. This feeling is rarely personal failure, and more often the result of larger economic forces. Forces that operate slowly, consistently, and mostly outside everyday awareness or public discussion. Recognizing those forces does not solve everything, but it changes how you respond next. It replaces confusion with awareness and frustration with clearer long-term intention. That shift alone can influence decisions about saving, investing, spending, and future planning. Over time, those decisions begin shaping a different financial story than expected before. A story defined less by struggle and more by gradual stability and quiet control. Real financial change is rarely dramatic and usually unfolds slowly, almost invisibly. Years later, the difference between awareness and ignorance becomes impossible to ignore. One path continues pressure, while the other slowly opens space for freedom. Both paths often begin from the same starting point in life. The only true difference is understanding what quietly shapes the outcome. Inflation is not dramatic each day, but becomes powerful across decades. Because it works slowly, many people never fully recognize its impact. They only feel life becoming harder without clearly knowing why. Until one day, the hidden pattern finally becomes impossible to overlook. In that moment, awareness arrives, bringing discomfort and clarity together at once. Discomfort from lost time and clarity from finally seeing truth clearly. Although the realization feels heavy, it is also deeply powerful, because seeing the system clearly means you are no longer completely controlled. You begin making choices with intention rather than habit or assumption. Those choices may remain small, but they are no longer blind. Small, clear steps repeated consistently can still change direction across time. Direction ultimately matters far more than speed in financial life. The hidden inflation tax may never fully disappear from the system, but understanding it changes how deeply it shapes your future. You stop running blindly and start moving with awareness instead. That awareness becomes the foundation for stronger long-term financial decisions. Decisions that protect not only income but future freedom and stability. Slowly and quietly, your financial story begins to change direction. Not because the world became easier, but because you understood it better. Understanding is often the first true form of financial power. Once gained, it cannot easily be taken away again. That is where genuine long-term security finally begins forming. Not in sudden wealth, but in steady, informed direction. And that direction begins the moment you finally see clearly. The inflation tax never asked permission and never truly stopped taking.